Hello and welcome to our daily sketching routine. It's Tuesday, May the 27th, 2025, and today's topic is going to call it tips for completing artwork. But before we begin, let me make a note here so I can remember. Before we begin, welcome back if you're returning, and welcome if you're new to the channel. I sketch and post every day, and I use a timer to stay focused and to build a habit. I'll start a 10-minute timer. In today's video, there's going to be a lot of sort of showing you, well, it's tips, so that's like the main thing. But yeah, I'll link to past couple of days. There was one where I basically sketched this out, and then yesterday was about like the different stages of like a drawing. Yeah, this took 2 hours. I'll explain it more in just a minute. I will put up maybe right here, I'll put up the first part, which you can follow along with. The second one so this was yesterday's, it has like the different stages. So there's the sketch, and then there's the values, or like the value pattern, or like the tonal pattern, or like the light and dark, or shading, whatever you want to call it, because there's different ways to approach that. This, for example, is one way. I don't always do it this way. This is like cross-hatching basically. The third part is like the detail part, which is basically like this, but it can also look like this, and it can also be used for like painting and stuff. But yeah, I won't be able to like go through all of that. It's in a lot of my other videos. So another thing I wanted to do was, I'll put up on the screen, I took a photo of this whole page and I turned it into black and white, like grayscale. Part of the approach was I was basically using cross-hatching, but like with color pens, and I'll go over that. But I wanted to show how it's important to understand like values, which is kind of what yesterday was basically about, was understanding like the value pattern and how to get what you need to get out of like the tools that you're using. So for example, there's like a felt tip pen, and yeah, like it's a Papermate. And that's basically what I use, or like these it's like color pack, multicolor pack of like Papermates. But yeah, I wanted to show like the grayscale version so that you can see how values relate to like the color. So I didn't see the grayscale, I was keeping it in mind. And I'll kind of explain like how that sort of works. And part of that, it has to do with like the technique, this particular technique, which is basically coloring. I wouldn't call this painting. I think painting would be like this page. So I made videos about this. To me, this is more painting. This is more coloring. All right. With all of that said, let me just go over all I used were like these Papermate pens, because I have them. I bought them like a while back, and they're pretty fun. I mean, when I see them, since I use this all the time, like they're pretty easy to use because I'm used to them. But color is sort of its own dimension, let's just call it. It adds another dimension to it basically, and it's kind of its own thing. But there's things that you can do to, one, not only have like a finished piece. So that's what I'm saying with this one. It's how to complete like an artwork. So kind of the thought process I went. So I didn't just do this, like I've played around and experimented with sort of this technique like in other sketches. And so that's what's good about sketchbooks, is you can get some ideas. To begin with, I was looking at pictures, and I liked the ones so I was just looking at pictures of like stone bridges, and there's a lot of them. And I like sort of like the main like color scheme. So with these, I just went with a couple of these to begin with. So one thing that I kept in mind, and because this is because it's coloring and not like painting, I already had like the black ink lines. So it looked closer to like kind of this kind of thing, but I didn't detail it as much, although in some parts I'm going in and kind of like adding that. I didn't do like videos of it so this is basically like the detail stage, and this is really where you want to take your time, like absolutely, like if you can, like definitely take your time with it. Also like be in a state of flow if you can, and also work on it for as long as you are able to kind of know what you're doing, and then stop if you like if you start to get a little bit tired or lost or whatever, because this is definitely not the time to like force anything into, because you did all the hard work. Like you did all the work of setting up like the picture, like the composition. So the detail is literally about the details. And as they say, like God or the devil's in the details. Because it's color and because it's coloring, I basically approached it like black and white, like if I were using black and white like ink. And what that means is that any color that I use, so these are basically the colors. So I went from this to begin with and then started adding like the brown kind of color, like yellow and like brown. And then for like the contrast, I went with like a blue and a purple. So that's the basic color scheme. But I started with this and I was just going to take this as far as until I like start to see something. And any of these colors, here are the colors, then I already had this going, the black. So when I'm doing a painting, I would cover up all of this. I wouldn't use as much ink and stuff like that. So a painting is a little different. I already had this kind of style going, so like this kind of look. And so basically I knew any color that I used on something like this was going to be basically like the mid-tone. And so when I put up the grayscale like earlier, that's why I wanted to show that. It's because I knew that this couldn't be as dark as like the black ink. So that was one thing that I was using as like a guide, again, for this particular technique, because it's pens. And similar to like markers, they're just like smaller markers basically. And I made it a point not to use like markers or paints and stuff like that, because then that's like a mixed medium. So, and yeah, and there's like a look to that. So that's one thing I kept in mind. And then the other thing that I kept in mind was that, so this I knew would be the equivalent of gray if I were just using gray. And then the other thing was like, I kept it limited, like the color, because color harmony and like color theory is kind of its own thing. And that's why I was looking at like photos of stuff like this, because there's a lot of subtlety in color. There's a lot of subtlety in like light and dark also. So with all of that said, that's like one thing that I kind of kept in mind. And so then the next thing was to go ahead and just lay in. So I just kind of work on this. Like I won't work on it a ton because I already did like a lot of it. So yeah, this took like a couple of hours. And I did it like, I worked on it for 1 hour and then took a break and then like worked on it for like another hour. And then now I'm back working on it. And so I would recommend definitely step away and give it some time to like, so you can see like what's going on, because that's what detail's all about. To begin with, I just used this again as a cross-hatching kind of thing because it's pen, and I was just using like the same style. So I just used this as the mid-tone because in black and white, like this would be like gray. So that's one thing. And then to keep the color scheme simple, I just picked like another like darker, like of the same color, of the same hue. I built it up gradually as if I were using black ink. And just kind of getting ideas from like reference photos. So that's basically how I worked on that. For the first hour, it was just sort of doing that. So basically the mid-tone, which is basically what this would be, is like the mid-tone, but I used color instead. Part of it was because it just kind of goes with it. Like it's sort of the same style. Plus it's also a way to, if you're just wanting, I mean, it's not a bad look. It looks pretty cool. And then it's a good way to kind of experiment with color and like the style and stuff. The next thing was to kind of add like a different color, and these were in a lot of the photos, I mean, because it's nature and everything. So you have like brown, same thing, just kind of build it up. But then the thing with color, so again, this is basically like gray if this were like black and white, but color tells you like what material something is, and it also leads the eye. That's like the other thing, and that just comes from doing it, like experimenting with it. So although this is in my sketchbook, I'm doing it finished enough to where it could be used as a an illustration for something. Well, definitely it could be used for like concept art for the story I'm working on. So part of this is what I mean about like take your time with this one. It leads the eye, and as soon as your eye gets kind of like you're not really seeing it, then that's when you sort of take a break. And I usually just set a timer. I usually count up so that like I'll glance at I'll work on it and then just kind of check, because usually I'll either get tired or I won't be able to see like what's going on. And then yeah, you start to kind of get a feel for like how long these things take. Like if you can see what you're doing, then you can just kind of do it, and then you'll be and then yeah, you'll make progress on it. Be gradual about it. And then when you work on it, you can kind of incorporate some of the sketch. Again, if it's detail, it really is detail. Like it's just these little tiny details. That's why it's called details. But notice that like during the sketch, I don't worry about the detail. It does say that like it's water because it's color, although in grayscale, like that would just be like gray. That's the thing with color. And really, you just kind of have to experiment and also look at photos and stuff, or like life, although this is like an imaginary scene, and there's like just balance to it. Like I'm just using this sort of as an accent color. That's kind of a good way to think about it. So I wouldn't put it like on these leaves, for example. And so you'll notice that like I kind of changed this. This actually was going to be like, this was like the dark figure, and then now it's like light, but that's okay, because part of it was, yeah, I was like just, so that'll be like the next kind of thing. So once I kind of used all of that, then I kind of went in with this because I already had like the black ink that was already part of the look. So that's why it's more like coloring and not so much like painting, although you could paint with this. It just has it has a more cartoony look to it. So with that said, yeah, I just used this, like I just went in and like started to define, but this is where you, again, just take your time with it, because a little like kind of goes a long way. But if you start to see kind of like what's going on, like, so that could be like the bank of the stream. But you want to be basically what I was doing with the like the sketch part, but it's just that I can see it a little bit more. So I'm just using it to like define some things. Same with like right here. So that's what I mean by like detail, is take your time with this and just kind of keep looking at like the effect. But this is like the final look of it, so you want to take your time. So kind of like this. But really, like once you have everything, it's pretty fun. Now I could go in and kind of paint over that to give it more light, but I might not, because that's like a different look. But I would call that like final detail stuff, and it may not be necessary. Like if it can look good like with just this detail part, then I'll leave it. And a lot of times it does. So for example, I thought I might go back in and do stuff here, but I might not, because that was 2 or 3 weeks ago that I did this. That's why it's detail, and that's why it is also like moving towards like fine detail, but it's still sort of being detailed. And yeah, you just have to take your time with it and look at some pictures. Like in photos, like you'll see this kind of thing. So the white of the paper is like a color, by the way, like right here. You could go in and paint over it. It's just that the white of the paper is going to be like bright. If you can find a way to keep it, that's good. But if you paint over it, kind of like on some of the dark areas, I mean, you could go back and like do something with that, like fix it again. So it's kind of like these little accents. You have to just be patient with it, because you can go overboard. And what I mean by when you overwork something is if you added something and now it kind of throws off the picture, and so then you have to like adjust it in a way, kind of like this. Let me zoom in here. But like in a way, like that's kind of what happened. I kind of overworked it, like added like shadows and whatnot, and kind of threw off like what I had. Part of it was also like the background, but it's not bad. And plus I didn't have like an exact idea of what these characters, like who they were or anything. It was just like an experiment. And then sometimes, yeah, you'll get some interesting characters and stories and stuff that come out of it. So just to kind of review how to complete, so tips on completing. So the different stages, so definitely like this little like series that I did where the links are in the description. Part of it is completing it. Part of it is understanding at what stage you're at, so that if you're sketching something, then you can finish the sketch. Or if you're like thumbnailing, then you'll know like you're thumbnailing. But the problem with doing this, like, so this is like a doodle. This is a thumbnail. And then I had like the sketch, and then developing the sketch. What happens is that if you're not really sure like why you're doing what you're doing, the steps, then it's just a bunch of guesswork and it's just not a lot of fun. Although you can also experiment, you can just play around. So for example, this painting thing is just playing around. In a way, like this is complete. It's a sketch. So like, but then you do this and then you just kind of build like a habit of keeping a sketchbook, and then it'll start to like stick with you. But if the issue is, so this is like my experiments with color, not so much like drawing, but if the issue is sort of getting better at drawing, then just draw stuff in black and white and just kind of play around with it and see if you can get like an effect, like whatever style you're going for, like with like black and white. Another example could be, here's like, again, just playing around with, but this one is with markers instead of color pens, which is, they're basically color pens. Same with, if you're playing around with like perspective, like I could redraw this better, but this is what I mean by just play around with it. So here's another one. This is more mixed medium. This is basically what I'm doing now, but like I added like other things to it, like paint and stuff. And it's not bad, but it has a different look than this, for example. If you're methodical about it and just kind of do it in like different stages and keep a sketchbook so that you can flip through it and kind of get ideas, then I think that'll be pretty helpful. Yeah, that'll be it for today. Let me know if you have any questions, and I want to thank you for joining me for a daily sketching routine. And if you enjoy these videos, please support the channel. I appreciate it. And until next time, keep on sketching.